Learning to read can become a competitive sport once kids start school, but how fast should they go? And what's the best way to make sure they develop a love of books along the way? Well, joining us now from Brisbane is literacy expert Pat Hipwell. Good morning, Pat.
Good morning.
Research has found nearly a quarter of Australian 5-year-olds aren't developmentally ready when they start school. What does that mean exactly, and where are they falling short?
Yes, developmental readiness for school. I mean, when we look at that, we look at a number of areas. We look at social skills, we look at their communication skills, their organisational skills, their fine motor, gross motor. I suppose when I'm thinking about literacy and learning to read, it's looking at those behaviours that indicate that they're ready to learn and be taught to read. So things like, can they talk fluently? Are they able to speak in sentences? Have they got good vocabulary knowledge, both in the vocab, the language that they use, but also the language that they understand? Are they able to listen and follow instructions? So all of these things we look for as developmental readiness and an indication that they are ready to respond to the formal teaching of reading.
Pat, talking about being ready, I remember hearing that kids aren't ready until they lose their first tooth. Is that a myth, or when do you think is the right time to start teaching kids how to read?
Yes, that's an interesting one because, of course, that's a physiological thing rather than an intellectual one, isn't it? Look, learning to read, like learning anything really, is about readiness to learn. And when we're ready to learn something, we learn it a great deal more quickly than we do if we're not ready to learn it. So this kind of links to your first question, is we want children by the time they start school to have some of those readiness indicators in place, such as the ones I've mentioned, the speaking, the listening, the vocab. So it's really less about an age or a stage, like you mentioned, the loss of the tooth. Some people start the children's love of reading at a very early age. I mean, there are parents who read to their children when they're in the womb. I've no evidence to suggest that that does anything, but however, getting those readiness indicators in place is a big role, and one that's played by parents and also other caregivers of children in their years before they start school.
How often should you correct children when they're learning? Can too much correcting damage their confidence?
Yes, it certainly can. Too much correcting does a number of things. It makes the child, particularly the struggling reader, very reluctant to have a go. They're nervous about making a mistake, so they are reluctant, they hesitate. But also one of the behaviours that good readers have is they self-correct. So they listen to themselves read, they monitor their reading, and when they make a mistake, they realise that they've made a mistake and go back and correct it, or they may ask for assistance, depending. So if we constantly as listeners do that correcting for students, for children, then it robs them of the opportunity to develop that skill, which is a key skill in a good reader.
Now, Pat, I'm thinking about when I'll be ready to start teaching Marley May how to read. When the time comes, what are some key tips you can give me?
Well, obviously, patience is a big thing, isn't it? But I think about reading to, reading with and reading by children. So initially we start when we're teaching children to read. There's a lot of reading to them by parents and teachers and so on. I think tips, a big tip is we want it to be an experience that children find pleasurable and that gives them confidence. So in the book, Helping Children Become Better Readers, there is a section that addresses how to introduce a book for the first time. So looking at ways in which we can introduce the book, talk about the book, look at some of the vocabulary. So when the your child, starts to read that book, they've already got a high level of familiarity with it, and so it's not so daunting. Obviously, you're going to need specific ways to prompt students, children, and also to how to support them and how to encourage them. So a big section of the book is looking at the things to say and do when children say and do particular things in a way that encourages and fosters reading rather than discourages it.
Sounds like a lot of great advice there, Pat. Pat Hipwell's new book is called Helping Children Become Better Readers. Pat, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.